The house at 847 Flower Street looked exactly the same as it had 8 years ago, when Rosalind Sharp became a widow. The same well-kept lawn, the same white shutters, the same mailbox labeled "The Sharp Family," even though the family no longer existed. At 71, Rosalind discovered that her late husband's habits had become more ingrained in her than she had realized. Every morning she brewed coffee for two. Every evening she set the table for two. The TV was tuned to the news channel Robert preferred. She even kept the temperature in the house at 68 degrees Fahrenheit, which he liked, even though she was always cold. The art teacher's pension plus Robert's insurance allowed them to live modestly but comfortably. For 32 years, she taught at Papillon High School, raised more than one generation of teenagers, taught them to distinguish between Monet and Manet, and explained the difference between Impressionism and Expressionism. After retiring, she planned to travel with her husband and visit the museums of Europe, which she knew only from textbooks. But a heart attack destroyed those plans in one October night. The first years after Robert's death were spent in a fog of grief and attempts to adjust to a new reality. Her children, Michael in Denver and Susan in Portland, called regularly, but each had their own lives and problems. Her grandchildren grew up knowing almost nothing about their grandmother from Nebraska. The turning point came on a December evening in 2023. Rosalind was sitting in her chair, leafing through a wedding photo album, when she heard laughter outside her window. A young couple was walking down the snow-covered street, holding hands. The girl whispered something in the boy's ear, and he laughed and put his arm around her shoulders. At that moment, Rosalind realized that she didn't just miss Robert, she missed intimacy, that feeling of being important and needed. Registering on the Silver Connection dating site was not easy. Rosalind deleted her profile 3 times before deciding to publish it. The photo was the last picture she had taken with Robert on their 40th wedding anniversary, but it was cropped so that only she was visible. In the About Me section, she wrote honestly, "Widow, former teacher, I love art and long conversations. Looking for company to spend time with." The first messages were disappointing. Men her age seemed either angry at the whole world or, conversely, overly intrusive. Some immediately sent photos in their underwear, others started the conversation with complaints about their ex-wives and prostate problems. A message from Fabian Cole arrived in January. "Hello, Rosalind. My name is Fabian. I am 29 years old. I know the age difference might seem strange, but I've always found mature women more interesting. You mentioned your love of art. I work with my hands, building houses, but in my free time, I go to museums. Maybe we could meet for coffee?" Rosalind reread the message 5 times. 29 years old, he was 42 years younger than her. It seemed absurd, but something in the tone of the message, in the respectful address, in the mention of museums intrigued her. She agreed, immediately regretted it, then changed her mind again. The meeting was scheduled at Main Street Cafe in the heart of Papillon. Rosalind arrived 20 minutes early, ordered a cappuccino, and nervously fixed her hair. When Fabian entered the cafe, she recognized him immediately. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a smile that caused wrinkles to spread from the corners of his eyes. "Rosalind!" He approached her table and extended his hand. His handshake was firm, his hands working hands, calloused but well-groomed. "Fabian, it's very nice to meet you." The conversation, which she feared would be awkward, flowed naturally. Fabian turned out to be unexpectedly well-read. He really knew his art and could hold a conversation about Van Gogh and Picasso. He told her that he had grown up in a dysfunctional family and started working at an early age, but had always sought knowledge. "I had an art teacher at school, Mrs. Anderson," he said, stirring his coffee. "She was the first to show me that beauty can be found in simple things. Since then, wherever I work, I try to find time for museums and galleries." Rosalind listened, forgetting her age and how strange they looked together. Fabian spoke seriously, without the patronizing tone she expected to hear from a young man. He asked questions about her work and listened attentively to her answers. Their second meeting took place a week later at the Joslin Art Museum in Omaha. Fabian picked her up in his pickup truck, clean, but clearly a workhorse. On the way, he told her about the project he was working on, a new residential complex on the outskirts of Papillon. At the museum, Rosalind was in her element. She talked about the paintings with the same enthusiasm she once had when teaching at school. Fabian listened attentively and asked unexpectedly profound questions. As they stood in front of a landscape by Thomas Morin, he said, "You know what I like about painting? The artist shows the world as only he sees it. It's incredibly honest." By the end of February, their meetings had become regular. Rosalind found herself eagerly awaiting Fabian's calls and messages. For the first time in 8 years, she began to think of herself not as Robert Sharp's widow, but simply as Rosalind. March brought early spring to Nebraska, and with it, new changes in Rosalind's life. Fabian became a regular guest at the house on Flower Street. He would come by in the evenings after work, still smelling of wood shavings and paint. But he always took a shower and changed into clean clothes, which he now kept in Rosalind's closet. Their relationship developed with the caution typical of people from different generations getting to know each other. Fabian proved to be surprisingly patient and attentive. He learned to make coffee the way Rosalind liked it, strong, with a drop of cream. He brought flowers every Friday, modest bouquets from the local flower shop, but chosen with taste. "I never thought I'd feel like a woman again," she confessed to her friend Dorothy during their weekly lunch at the village inn. Dorothy, who had known Rosalind since college, had mixed feelings about the new romance. "Rose, are you sure about this guy? He's younger than your son," her friend cautiously remarked as she cut her salad. "Age is just a number," Rosalind replied, surprising even herself with her words. "Fabian understands me better than some men of my generation." And it was true. Fabian listened to her stories about her teaching career, about students she remembered years later. He didn't try to change her habits, accepting the cool temperature in the house and early dinners. On weekends, they drove to Omaha to visit exhibitions and theater productions. Fabian was a good driver, and his pickup truck was kept in perfect condition. Physical intimacy came naturally on one April night when Fabian stayed for dinner and got caught in a sudden rain shower. Rosalind offered him the couch for the night, but in the middle of the night he came into her bedroom. She didn't resist. At 71, she rediscovered her femininity, her ability to be desired. Meanwhile, at the Main Street Cafe where their first date took place, Megan Reed worked as a waitress. At 24, she had already lived a full life. She dropped out of college after her sophomore year and moved from her native Iowa to Nebraska to start a new life. The job at the cafe was temporary, as was her rented studio apartment, as were most of her relationships. Megan was one of those girls who was used to men liking her without having to make any effort. She had blonde hair, which she dyed herself, a figure maintained by youth and genetics, and a smile that could be sincere or professional, as needed. She dreamed of more than working as a waitress in the suburbs of Omaha, but she didn't yet know how to achieve it. Fabian noticed her at the end of April. He came into the cafe alone, in his work clothes, and ordered a coffee to go. Megan saw different men. Many tried to talk to her. Some were attractive, but there was something special about Fabian. He was confident but not arrogant, and he didn't stare at her cleavage like most construction workers, but looked her in the eyes. "Double espresso," he ordered, taking out his wallet. "And, if I may, your name." "Megan?" she replied, feeling her cheeks flush. "And yours?" "Fabian. I work on a construction site not far from here. I'm sure we'll see each other again." He didn't linger or insist on conversation. He just took his coffee, smiled, and left. But the next day came again, and then another day. By the end of the week, they were already chatting about trivial things: the weather, plans for the weekend, how tired they were of winter in Nebraska. Fabian was cautious in his courtship. He didn't rush things or ask her out right away. Megan was used to more straightforward men, and this tactic intrigued her. When he finally asked her out to dinner, she agreed without hesitation. Their first date was at an Italian restaurant in Omaha on Friday evening. Fabian looked completely different in a clean shirt and jeans without paint stains. He turned out to be an interesting conversationalist, talking about his work and his plans to start his own construction company. He asked about her dreams and listened attentively to her answers. "I want to go to cosmetology school," Megan confessed over dessert. "I've always been good at doing hair and makeup, but I don't have enough money yet." "That's a good goal," Fabian agreed. "You have to strive for something." Megan was charmed. Fabian didn't try to impress her with an expensive dinner or show off. He was sincere, or at least she thought so. After dinner, they walked around the old Omaha market, and when he walked her to her car, the kiss felt natural, not forced. By May, Fabian had established a clear schedule. He spent 3 days a week with Rosalind, usually Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. The rest of the days were devoted to work, and now, Megan. The girl worked shifts, so their meetings were irregular, which suited everyone. Rosalind didn't ask any unnecessary questions. At their age, she reasoned, everyone has a right to personal space. Fabian explained his absence by work, overtime, and meetings with clients. He really did work a lot. Spring was the busy season for builders. But some details began to raise alarm bells. Fabian began to check his phone more often, responding to messages while retreating to another room. When the phone rang, he sometimes didn't answer, saying it was work, and after work, he was resting. Rosalind tried not to read too much into it, but her maternal instinct, developed over years of working with teenagers, told her that something was wrong. One day in late May, they were having dinner at a restaurant on the outskirts of Papillon when Fabian suddenly tensed up, looking out the window. "Is something wrong?" Rosalind asked. "No, I thought so," he replied quickly, but he didn't look at the window again. Rosalind turned and saw a young blonde woman getting into a car in the parking lot. The girl was beautiful, about the age when life seems endless and the future full of possibilities. The age Rosalind had been 40 years ago. June in Nebraska was hot, and for the first time in years, Rosalind thought about installing a more powerful air conditioner. Fabian offered to help with the selection and installation, but when it was time to go to the store, he canceled the appointment at the last minute. "An urgent call to the construction site," he explained on the phone. His voice sounded tired, but there was something else in it too. Haste, a desire to end the conversation quickly. "I'm sorry, dear. Shall we postpone it until tomorrow?" Rosalind agreed, but for the first time in 4 months of their relationship, she felt a pang of suspicion. Fabian had only recently started using the word darling, and every time he did, it sounded a little forced, as if he were reminding himself to be affectionate. The next day, while shopping for groceries at the supermarket, she ran into Tom Bennett, a neighbor who worked as a foreman for the same construction company as Fabian. "Hi, Rosalind," Tom greeted her, pushing a cart loaded with beer and chips. "How are you?" "Long time no see. I'm fine, thank you. How's work? I bet you have a lot of orders this season?" "Yeah, there's plenty of work. Just yesterday I had to let the guys go early because it started raining. At least it was Friday." Rosalind nodded, but something inside her felt cold. Yesterday was Friday, and Fabian said he was staying late for an urgent call. It only started raining in the evening, but he called during the day. At home, she tried to convince herself that she had simply misunderstood. Maybe Fabian had another job, a side gig, or maybe Tom was talking about a different crew. But the seed of doubt had been sown and was beginning to sprout. For the next 2 weeks, Rosalind watched Fabian with an attention she didn't admit to herself. She noticed how he hid his phone when she entered the room, how quickly he turned away from the screen when messages came in, how his schedule had changed. Now he canceled meetings more often or arrived later than usual. "Are you okay?" she asked one day, as they were having dinner on the terrace. Fabian seemed distracted, several times failing to answer her questions. "Of course. just a lot of work. A new project is starting, a lot of responsibility. He smiled that smile that once made her heart beat faster. But now Rosalind saw something mechanical, rehearsed in that smile. The decision to follow Fabian came spontaneously. On Tuesday morning, he left for work as usual. Rosalind waited half an hour, got into her old Honda Civic, and drove to the construction site where, according to Fabian, he spent most of his time. The construction site did indeed exist, a new residential complex on the western outskirts of Papillon. Rosalind parked at a distance and watched. Workers came and went, but Fabian's pickup truck was not among the cars. She waited until lunchtime, but never saw him. The next day, she repeated the experiment. The result was the same. Fabian did not show up at the construction site, which he called his main place of work. On Thursday morning, Rosalind decided to take a different route. If Fabian wasn't at work, where was he spending his time? She started with the Main Street Cafe, where they had met. She parked across the street and waited. At 11:30, she saw the familiar pickup truck. Fabian got out of the car, but he didn't look like he usually did at the end of the workday. His clothes were clean, his hair was neatly combed. He entered the cafe like a man who knew why he was there. Rosalind waited a few minutes, then followed him inside. The cafe was almost empty, just a few customers at different tables. Fabian sat by the window, across from a young blonde woman in a waitress uniform. She was the same girl Rosalind had seen at the restaurant a month ago. They weren't just talking. Fabian was holding the girl's hand, stroking her fingers. She laughed, leaning toward him across the table. There was an intimacy in their postures, their glances, their touches that was impossible to miss. Rosalind felt the world tilt. 4 months of relationship, 4 months of plans, hopes, the feeling that life had regained meaning, all collapsed in a few seconds. She turned around and quickly left the cafe, afraid that Fabian would notice her. In the car, she sat motionless, trying to make sense of what she had seen. Her hands were shaking when she started the engine. The drive home was a blur. All day long, Rosalind tried to find a logical explanation. Maybe she was just an acquaintance, a colleague, but she had been a wife and mother for too long not to recognize the signs of a romantic relationship. The way they looked at each other was unmistakable. That evening, Fabian came home as if nothing had happened. He brought flowers and talked about his difficult day at the construction site and problems with material suppliers. Rosalind listened, nodded, and prepared dinner. Outwardly, everything was as usual, but inside, a rage she hadn't felt in years was growing. "Fabian," she said, as they sat at the table, "I need to tell you something." "Of course, dear." "What's wrong?" "I saw you today, at the cafe." With that girl, Fabian froze with his fork in his hand. His face reflected surprise, confusion, an attempt to understand how much she knew. "I don't understand what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me!" Rosalind raised her voice for the first time in 4 months. "I saw you holding her hand. The way you looked at her. Do you think I'm blind?" Fabian slowly put his fork down on his plate. The mask of the caring lover finally slipped from his face. "Rosalind, it's not what you think." "Then what is it?" "Explain to me what it is." A long pause. Fabian stared at his plate, gathering his thoughts. "Megan is a girl I'm dating. I was dating her before I met you. And you're still dating her now." "Yes." The simple admission hit her like a blow. Rosalind felt the blood rush to her face. "So you've been cheating on me for 4 months?" "I didn't want to hurt you." "You didn't want to hurt me?" Rosalind jumped up, knocking over her chair. "You used me!" "You played with me like I was a fool." "Rosalind, calm down. Let's talk calmly." "Calm down? You think you can just explain everything and I'll understand? That I'll share you with some girl?" Fabian stood up and tried to approach her, but Rosalind backed away. "Leave," she said quietly but firmly. "Leave immediately. Rosalind, listen to me. Leave! Fabian silently gathered his things. He turned at the door. I'm sorry. I really am. You're a good woman, but what? But old? But stupid? Finish your thought. But we're from different worlds. You have to understand that after he left, Rosalind sat down on the floor in the middle of the kitchen and cried. The tears were bitter, from humiliation, from disappointment, from the realization that she had allowed herself to be deceived. At 71, she felt like a naive little girl. But gradually the tears dried up and were replaced by cold rage. Did Fabian think he could use her, humiliate her, and just walk away? That she would humbly accept his explanations and back down? For 3 days after the breakup, Rosalind didn't leave the house. She turned off her phone, didn't answer Dorothy's calls, didn't check her mail. In the refrigerator was the food she had prepared for Fabian, his favorite casserole, Italian bread, expensive wine bought for special occasions. Now it all seemed like a joke. She found his toothbrush in the bedroom, a forgotten t-shirt with a construction company logo, deodorant in the bathroom. Every little thing was a painful reminder of how foolish she had been, how she had allowed herself to be taken advantage of. On Saturday morning, she received a message from Fabian. Rosalind, I need to pick up my tools. They're in the garage. Can I come over? She stared at her phone screen for a long time. The tools were indeed in the garage. Fabian had brought them a month ago when he fixed her leaky faucet. A set of expensive professional tools, his pride and joy. Good tools are half the battle in any job, he said at the time, showing each one with the love of a craftsman. Come by on Sunday at 3 p.m., she replied. Rosalind spent Sunday morning cleaning the house with maniacal thoroughness. She washed the floors, dusted, even cleaned the oven, which she hadn't used in months. The work helped her not to think, but her thoughts kept returning to Fabian and that girl from the cafe. How did they laugh at her? Did they discuss the strange old woman who thinks a young man can truly love her? Rosalind imagined their conversations, and every imagined laugh was like a stab in the heart. By 3 o'clock, she was ready. She put on a simple black dress, combed her hair neatly, and put on makeup. If this was their last meeting, she wanted to look her best. Fabian arrived right on time. He got out of his pickup truck slowly, like a man preparing for an unpleasant conversation. He was wearing clean jeans and a shirt. He had dressed for their meeting the way he used to dress for dates. Hi, Rosalind, he said at the door. Thank you for letting me come. Come in. The tools are in the garage, you know. They walked through the house in silence. The garage was cool and quiet. The tools lay on the workbench in the same order Fabian had left them. He began putting them in the box, checking each one. Rosalind, I want you to know, I didn't want it to turn out this way, he said, without looking up. You really are a special woman, but not special enough to be the only one. That's not the point. Then what is it? Explain it to me, Fabian. What made you lie to me for 4 months? He finally looked up. There was weariness in his eyes, but no remorse. You want honesty? Fine. I needed money. Megan is having trouble paying her rent, and she wants to go to cosmetology school. And you have a house, a pension, insurance. I thought maybe we could help each other. Rosalind felt something cold spread across her chest. Help each other? You wanted me to sponsor your girl's education? Don't be so harsh. I thought you'd understand in time. We could work out some kind of arrangement. Arrangement? Rosalind repeated the word as if tasting it. I would be your sponsor and she would be your mistress. Rosalind. And what would I get? Crumbs of your attention? Gratitude for financing someone else's happiness? Fabian closed the toolbox and lifted it. I understand that you're angry. It's natural. But think realistically. What could we have had in common in the long run? The age difference, different backgrounds, different goals. So you were doing me a favor? Teaching me about life? I was trying to make everyone happy. Rosalind slowly walked over to the workbench. Among the tools left on it was a sharp utility knife, the very one Fabian had used to carefully cut the wallpaper when he helped her repaper the living room walls. Everyone was happy, she repeated quietly. You got money for your girlfriend. She got a paid education. And I got the illusion of love. Very fair. It's not an illusion. I was happy with you. You're an interesting, intelligent woman. But I have needs that you can't satisfy. He said the last word softly, almost sympathetically, and it was worse than a scream. Rosalind picked up the knife. Fabian didn't notice. He was picking up a wrench that had fallen on the floor. What needs? She asked. You know what I mean. Physical, emotional. I need a woman my age with whom I can build a future, have children. He straightened up, turned to her, and saw the knife in her hands. Rosalind, what are you doing? Satisfying your needs, she said calmly. It all happened very quickly. Fabian tried to back away, but tripped over a toolbox. Rosalind was closer than he thought. The knife went in easily, between his legs, right on target. Fabian screamed, doubled over, and fell to his knees. The blood flowed more profusely than Rosalind had expected. Fabian tried to clamp his hands over the wound, but blood seeped through his fingers, spreading across the concrete floor of the garage. He looked at her with horror and incomprehension. Rosalind, please call an ambulance. Now you have no needs that I cannot satisfy, she said, watching him weaken. Fabian tried to crawl to the door, but his legs wouldn't obey him. The blood loss was too severe. After a few minutes, he stopped moving. Rosalind stood over the body, holding the bloody knife. She expected to feel remorse, horror, panic. But inside, there was only a strange emptiness and a surprising calm. First, she washed the knife under the tap in the garage, dried it, and put it back on the workbench. Then she took off the dress, which had a few drops of blood on it, and put it in the washing machine with the other dark clothes. She took a shower and thoroughly washed her hands, nails, and hair. After changing into clean clothes, she returned to the garage. Fabian's body was lying in a pool of blood. Rosalind closed her eyes and concentrated. She had to think practically. She called the police at 6:30 in the evening. 911, what's the emergency? I found a man in my garage. He seems to be dead. Please come. Her voice trembled naturally from the shock she was pretending to feel. The police arrived 8 minutes later. The first to arrive was Patrol Officer Johnson, a young cop who clearly didn't deal with murders very often. Next came Detective James Harris, a veteran with 20 years of experience, and the crime scene investigators. Mrs. Sharp? Detective Harris was a short man with piercing eyes and a tired face. Tell us what happened. Rosalind sat in the kitchen, holding a cup of tea that Officer Johnson had brought her. She looked like an elderly woman in shock, pale, confused, her hands trembling as she raised the cup to her lips. I went to the garage to get some gardening tools. I wanted to trim the roses, and I saw him, Fabian, covered in blood. Fabian is? Fabian Cole. We had been dating for a few months. Did he visit your home often? Quite often. He has keys, or rather he had. I don't know where they are now. Detective Harris made notes in his notebook. When did you last see him? On Thursday. We had an argument. I found out he had another girlfriend. I told him to get out. And today? He sent me a message. He wanted to pick up his tools. I said yes. But when he didn't come out for a long time, I went to check on him, and my God, who could have done such a thing? The tears were real. Not from grief, but from relief that it was all over. Mrs. Sharp, we're going to have to search the house. It's standard procedure. Of course. Do what you need to do. While the forensic team worked in the garage, Detective Harris inspected the house. In the bedroom, he found men's clothing, and in the bathroom, toiletries. Everything confirmed Rosalind's words about a close relationship. Did you notice anything suspicious? Any unfamiliar people nearby? Any cars? No, nothing. I was home all day, reading, cleaning. I heard a car pull up and thought it was Fabian coming for his tools, and then it was quiet. How much time passed between his arrival and when you went to the garage? I'm not sure. Maybe an hour? I thought he was sorting through his tools, deciding what to take. He had a lot of them. The detective studied the records on Rosalind's phone, her correspondence with Fabian, the latest messages about the tools. Everything looked plausible. By 10 o'clock in the evening, the body had been taken away and the garage sealed. Detective Harris left Rosalind his business card. If you remember anything else, call me. And Mrs. Sharp, you may need psychological help after such a shock. I can recommend a specialist. Thank you. You're very kind. When the police left, Rosalind locked the house and drew the curtains. She sat down in Robert's favorite chair and felt at peace for the first time in a week. Fabian would no longer take advantage of naive women. He would no longer make plans at someone else's expense. Detective James Harris didn't sleep all night after examining the crime scene. 20 years of working in the homicide department had taught him not to trust his first impressions, and something about Rosalind Sharp's story bothered him. Too many coincidences, too convenient a version of events. On Monday morning, he began by questioning Megan Reed. The girl had worked the night shift at a cafe and had just woken up when Harris knocked on the door of her studio apartment on Oak Street. Miss Reed? Detective Harris, Sarpy County Police. I need to talk to you about Fabian Cole. Megan paled as she let him into her cramped apartment. What happened? Is he okay? I'm afraid I have bad news. Mr. Cole was found dead last night. The girl sank onto the sofa, covering her mouth with her hand. The tears were real. How? What happened? It's under investigation. Tell me about your relationship with Mr. Cole. We dated for a few months. He was a good man. He planned to help me get into cosmetology school. Did you know about his relationship with Rosalind Sharp? Pause. Megan wiped her tears with a napkin. I did. Fabian said it was temporary, that he would break up with her soon. Temporary? She was helping him with money. Fabian explained that she had a house, a pension. He didn't want to take advantage of her. He just needed help to get back on his feet. Harris took notes. The picture was starting to become clearer. When was the last time you saw Mr. Cole? On Friday. We met at a cafe after my shift. He seemed upset, said the old woman had found out. The old woman? Megan blushed. Sorry, that's what he sometimes called Rosalind. Not in a mean way, just, Harris understood, and he didn't like what he understood. Next was a visit to Tom Bennett, Fabian's neighbor and colleague. Tom was working in his garage when the detective arrived. Fabian was a good guy, Tom said, wiping his hands with a rag. Hard-working, reliable. It's a shame it turned out this way. Mr. Bennett, did you know about his personal life? I knew he was seeing some older lady. He said she was helping him out financially. I didn't approve, to be honest, but it wasn't my business. What about the younger girl? Tom nodded. Megan, pretty girl from the cafe. Fabian was really in love with her. He was planning to marry her as soon as he sorted out his financial problems. Problems? He had debts. His father was an alcoholic and left behind a lot of loans. Fabian was paying them off. That's why he got involved with that pensioner. He needed money. Each conversation added details to the portrait of Fabian Cole. Not a saint, but not a monster either. A young man who found himself in a difficult situation and made questionable decisions. On Tuesday, Harris received a preliminary report from medical examiner Dr. Sarah Mitchell. The cause of death was blood loss from a deep cut to the genital area, she explained at the morgue. The blow was inflicted with a sharp blade, presumably a knife. Judging by the angle of the wound, the attacker was directly in front of the victim. Self-defense? Doubtful. There are no defensive wounds on Cole's arms or forearms. Either he didn't expect the attack, or his movements were restricted. Anything else? There is no biological material from the attacker under the victim's fingernails. There was no struggle. Also, the cut is very precise, anatomically speaking. The attacker knew where to strike. Harris thought about it. An elderly woman, an anatomically precise blow, no struggle. The picture was unpleasant. On Wednesday, he visited Rosalind again. This time, she greeted him in a neatly tidied living room and offered him coffee and cookies. "How are you, Mrs. Sharp? How are you coping?" "I'm trying to hold on. My friends are helping, but it's still hard. I spoke to people who knew Mr. Cole. It turns out he had financial problems." "Yes, he mentioned his father's debts. I sometimes helped him with money." "How much, if you don't mind me asking?" Rosalind hesitated for a moment. "Not much. A few thousand over time, for car repairs, paying bills." "Did you know about Megan Reed?" Now the pause was longer. "I found out recently. That's why we had a fight." "How did you find out?" "I saw them together in a cafe. I realized he was cheating on me." Harris watched her face. Rosalind remained calm, but there was a hard gleam in her eyes. "Mrs. Sharp, I need to ask you a direct question. Did you kill Fabian Cole?" "What? Of course not. How could you ask that?" "Because the evidence points to you. The crime scene is your home. The motive is jealousy and humiliation. The opportunity is that you were alone with the victim." Rosalind rose from her chair and began pacing the room. "This is absurd. I'm an elderly woman. How could I have killed a healthy young man?" "With a very precise knife wound. A wound inflicted by someone who knows anatomy. You taught art, didn't you? You studied the structure of the human body for your painting." "Detective Harris, I think we need to end this conversation. If you have charges, file them officially." "Fine. Rosalind Sharp, you are under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Fabian Cole." When the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, Rosalind sighed with relief. The game was over. "I want to confess," she said in the car on the way to the station. In the interrogation room, in the presence of a court-appointed lawyer, Rosalind told the whole truth about how she discovered the affair, about the conversation in the garage when Fabian explained his motives, about how rage overtook reason. "He said he had needs that I couldn't satisfy," she said monotonously. "Then I decided to satisfy one of them, the need to punish him for lying." The trial began in October. The defense tried to prove temporary insanity, citing the defendant's age and the emotional shock of betrayal. The prosecution insisted on premeditated first-degree murder. The trial attracted national media attention. Pensioner killer, fatal love in Nebraska, revenge of the gray-haired. The headlines multiplied every day. On the witness stand, Megan Reed cried as she recounted Fabian's plans for the future. Tom Bennett described him as an honest worker. Dorothy testified about how happy Rosalind was in her relationship with Fabian. Rosalind herself maintained her dignity. In her final statement, she said, "I don't justify my actions. Murder is always a tragedy. But I want young people to remember that everyone has feelings, even older women, even those who seem like easy targets." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. The verdict was guilty of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced Rosalind Sharp to 25 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. At 71, the prospect of being released at 86 seemed remote. But Rosalind accepted the sentence calmly. At the Nebraska Women's Correctional Facility, she got a job in the library and taught art classes to inmates. Sometimes she received letters from people who supported her actions. "You did what many women dream of doing," wrote one correspondent from California. Rosalind never replied to such letters. Revenge, no matter how sweet it may seem at the moment, always leaves a bitter aftertaste. The story of Rosalind and Fabian became a cautionary tale about what happens when despair meets deception and loneliness meets calculation. In the small town of Papillon, people still whisper about her, reminding each other that even quiet retirees are capable of terrible revenge.